I'm Hannah Whitmore, 29 years old, and the last time I sat across from my parents at a dinner table, they told me I was throwing away my life. That was 5 years ago. Tonight, they're seated at a restaurant with a 5-week wait list, glasses full, plates steaming, and no idea that everything around them belongs to me. When the general manager walked up and said, "Welcome back, Miss Hannah. Your table is ready," my father nearly choked on his wine. That was the moment it all turned. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, I grew up in Ridgefield, Connecticut, right where suburban comfort blends into old money tradition. My parents believed in appearances, tightly pressed shirts on school mornings, church every Sunday, even if we didn't believe in much, and long lectures about effort and excellence. My older sister Rachel got straight A's and early admission to Princeton. My younger brother Tyler was practically raised in a suit, being prepped for a future in finance. I didn't fit anywhere in that frame, while Rachel competed in Model Congress and Tyler played travel soccer. I spent afternoons at a local petting farm, brushing pigs and asking questions the others didn't think to ask. I wasn't just curious. I was drawn in by the rhythm of it, by the way animals responded to consistency and care, by the smell of hay and the quiet that came after morning chores. At 12, I could tell you more about feed ratios than most adults. By 14, I knew I wanted a farm of my own. My parents thought it was a phase. They called it cute until I brought home brochures for agricultural colleges. My mom asked if it was a joke. My dad folded his newspaper and said, "Pigs don't pay mortgages." They didn't understand that it wasn't about animals. It was about building something that felt real. They pushed me to apply to state schools, and I did, but it didn't stick a year and a half in. I dropped out, packed everything into a borrowed pickup, and headed to Vermont. They called once, then didn't call again after I told them I was leasing 5 acres to raise pigs. The silence wasn't surprising. I moved into a rusted trailer with a soft spot in the flooring and a heater that sputtered when the temperature dropped below freezing. I worked odd jobs in the evenings and learned how to repair fencing by trial and error. I started with 6 pigs rescues from a shuttered operation. The local co-op didn't take me seriously, and neither did the folks at the feed store. But every morning I walked that field, boots sinking into the cold ground, and told myself, if nothing else, this honest work. Some nights the quiet was too big, but the pigs never missed a meal, and I learned to stretch dollars until they bent. I sold bacon at farmers markets and put everything I earned back into the land. At the time, I didn't know it would turn into anything bigger. I just knew I couldn't go back. And somewhere between loading hay bales and scrubbing water troughs, I started filming short clips of what I was doing. Not for an audience, just for myself, a way to track the progress. Then one morning, I posted a minute-long video of a smoked pork shoulder pulled fresh from the pit greens from the garden eggs, still warm from the neighbor's coop. And that video, quiet, simple, no filters, changed everything, and that's where I'll leave it for now. Next time I'll tell you how one meal under a string of hardware store lights turned into a restaurant with a 6-month wait list, and how I built something bigger than I ever planned, all because no one believed I could until then. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happened when they finally walked into my world without even knowing it was mine. The first winter was the hardest, the kind where the trailer's windows froze on the inside and the space heater wheezed like it wanted to give up. I laid extra blankets across the floor and lined the walls with old feed sacks, anything to keep the cold from climbing into the corners of my bed. Some nights I wore 2 pairs of socks and a knit hat to sleep, and still woke up shivering. The pigs huddled close in the shelter I built from salvaged wood and a neighbor's old barn door. It wasn't pretty, but it stood against the wind. I woke before the sun every morning and walked the fence line, boots crunching through half-frozen mud, the smell of damp hay and wood smoke mixed with frost, and whatever the pigs had knocked over overnight. No one visited, no one called. And when my grandmother passed later that year, I found out 2 weeks after the funeral in a grocery aisle when I ran into a woman who used to know my mother. I nodded politely, said nothing, then went back to the farm and restacked the hay bales that had fallen in the wind. There was always work to do. I learned how to split wood the right way, how to keep a water line from freezing, and how to patch a broken hoof with duct tape and a steady hand. I kept a small notebook in the kitchen drawer where I tracked every feed measurement and every illness. It was the only place where I let myself be unsure. The locals called me Pig Girl, half teasing, half unsure what to make of me. I'd nod when they said it, then pick up my grain and head back to the truck. Every dollar I made went to feed or medicine or patching something that had broken in the night. The boots I wore were secondhand. The gloves I used had holes in the thumbs. Still, I didn't stop in the afternoons. I hauled buckets and cleaned the pen, then walked down to the tiny patch of garden I'd cleared behind the trailer. I planted greens and herbs, nothing fancy, just enough for a few meals here and there once a week. I drove into town to sell bacon at the farmer's market. The folding table barely held together, and my signage was done by hand. But the meat sold slow and steady, and that was enough. I didn't take days off, didn't go out for birthdays or holidays. The only calendar I followed was the one pinned above the sink marked with vet appointments and breeding cycles. I spent most of that first year without hearing my name spoken by anyone who knew me before, but the pigs knew my footsteps. They came running when I opened the gate, snuffling around my boots like I was one of their own. I named them after old country singers and long-forgotten roads. They lived better than most animals in the county, even if I had to eat rice and lentils some nights to keep them fed. The idea was never to make money fast. It was to build something. Right. Still, there were mistakes. One spring I misjudged the fencing and lost a whole section of pasture overnight. The pigs tore through it looking for grubs, and I spent the next day hauling panels in the rain, trying to fix what I should have planned for another time. I mixed feed ratios wrong, and 2 piglets got sick. I sat up with them through the night, wrapped in old towels with hot water bottles tucked beside them. One made it. One didn't. I buried her near the edge of the field under a cedar tree and marked the spot with a flat stone. I didn't cry until the next morning when the frost lifted and the silence settled in. Then I cried quietly, so the pigs wouldn't notice. Even with everything, I never thought about quitting. Instead, I started recording small things. A pan of pork belly crisping over a fire, the way the morning light hit the dew on the pasture, a pot of greens simmering next to a skillet of cornbread cooked over a propane flame. I filmed myself working just to see the difference from week to week. I didn't mean for anyone to watch it, but after a long shift one night I posted a short clip of breakfast pork, slow smoked over hickory eggs with bright orange yolks and collards I'd picked behind the trailer. Just 1 minute I uploaded it, then turned off the light. By the next afternoon, it had 20,000 views. By the third day, it had over 2 million people started messaging, asking how I made the bacon so crisp where they could try it, if I sold it anywhere. At first I ignored them, then someone sent a note from a regional food blog asking if they could write a piece about me. I cleaned the shelter twice before I said yes. Then came another message from a local magazine, and then one I couldn't quite believe. A small investment group out of Boston wanted to talk. They said they'd seen my content, that they liked my values, that they were looking for someone building something real. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I said they could come by for dinner. I pulled together a table from mismatched chairs under a string of lights strung between fence posts. I cooked 6 courses. Every dish made from my own pork greens from the garden apples from a neighbor's tree. No servers, no polish. Just food, served warm, and with both hands they signed the papers. The next morning, I sat on the porch after they left. Boots off, jacket open, letting the wind blow through the edges of everything I'd built. The field stretched out in front of me, brown and patched with frost. The pigs slept under the lean-to, full and quiet, and somewhere between the leftover cider and the stack of plates waiting in the sink, I felt the smallest shift, not like a finish line, but like a door easing open. Next time I'll tell you what came after, how a dinner under farm lights turned into a restaurant that no one could get into without waiting weeks, and how the family who erased me walked straight through its front door without knowing whose name built it. Make sure you're following so you don't miss what happened when they found out. After that backyard dinner, things moved fast. The contract was clean. The funding came through in stages, and for the first time since I stepped onto that land, I had enough to build something more than survival. But even with the new plans and steady hands helping me raise walls where there used to be windbreak tarps, the quiet didn't change. I still mucked the stalls every morning, still walked the fence line boots, heavy with mud, still sat alone most nights eating whatever was left from the test batch. The Honest Pig opened inside a converted feed store. The walls were lined with reclaimed barn wood, and every table had been sanded down and sealed by hand. I made sure there was no sign out front, just a cast-iron pig silhouette above the door. We didn't advertise much, but once people started coming, they didn't stop. The first week, we ran out of seating. The second week, folks brought lawn chairs and thermoses. By month 3, we had a wait list, and I was running 2 shifts and still butchering 3 days a week to keep the supply chain clean. Some of the same farmers who once rolled their eyes now dropped off crates of heirloom vegetables and shook my hand on the way out. A few apologized without using the word. The press found us not long after that. A writer from a Northeast food journal showed up for dinner and ended up staying through closing. A month later, a piece in Bon Appetit called it the most honest plate in New England. I clipped it out and folded it into the back of my notebook, but never mentioned it to anyone. I didn't put my name on the menu or the website. I kept the brand faceless when they asked who was behind it. The manager would just say, "The owner prefers to stay private." I turned down the first 5 offers to expand. Most came with strings. Then I met Gloria Sandoval through a former supplier. She'd built a small bakery line into a regional powerhouse, and she understood what I was protecting. We agreed over strong coffee and a plate of biscuits that we'd scale without losing what mattered. 9 months later, we opened the Boston flagship inside an old train station. Vaulted ceilings exposed brick, original iron beams that still bore the soot from the last steam engines. I walked the floor the night before we opened, made notes on light angles and table spacing. Gloria handled the operations team while I finalized the spring menu with the kitchen. Every decision was still mine. I never spoke to my family through any of it. They didn't reach out, and I didn't send anything back until the email arrived one afternoon when I was checking reservations. Subject line: dinner at the Honest Pig. It was from Rachel. "Congratulations on the engagement dinner," it read. "We can't wait to celebrate. See you Saturday. Reservation for 7:30 p.m. My name wasn't mentioned until the last line. "You better come, Hannah. Mom says you owe her at least that much." I stared at the screen for a while before I scrolled down and opened the confirmation flagship location table for 7. They'd waited 5 weeks for that table. I didn't know if she pulled strings or begged the reservation team or just got lucky. But it didn't matter. They were coming, and they didn't know. My name wasn't on any ownership documents they'd ever seen. Nothing tied me to the brand in public records or press articles. That was deliberate. I built it quietly and kept it that way. For a moment, I hovered over the cancel button. I could have claimed a system error or private booking, but instead, I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. I was no longer the girl. They pushed out of the house with a suitcase and a warning. I had built something that stood without their name on it. That Saturday, I arrived 10 minutes early, not through the kitchen, not in my rubber boots, or with an apron tied at the waist. I wore a faded corduroy jacket, a denim dress, and my oldest pair of brown leather boots, the ones with dust still clinging to the sole from that morning's chores. The hostess nodded when she saw me and handed me the seating plan. I asked her to let them settle first. From the hallway, I could already hear my mother's clipped tone as she corrected a wine choice, and my father reading the menu like it was a legal document. Rachel's voice rose in short bursts above the hum. When the cue came, I walked in. 7 heads turned for a moment. Nobody said anything. Then my father chuckled. "You think you belong in a place like this?" I smiled and pulled out the only empty chair. "Evening," I said. Rachel leaned toward my mother and whispered, just loud enough she still smells like the barn. I folded my napkin and placed it on my lap. No one asked how I'd been. No one said it was good to see me. My mother sipped her champagne without looking up. "You could have dressed up a little," she said. "This is formal for me." My father leaned back in his chair. "Hope you can afford dinner," he said. "Place like this isn't cheap." I reached for the water, said nothing. They started with shared plates, maple-glazed bacon, flatbread, and pork roulade. They didn't know came from my original recipe book. My mother pushed aside the pickled onions. Rachel scraped off the crackling. My father asked if the bacon was cut too thick for modern plating. I nodded along and poured another glass of water. No one noticed the manager step toward our table. That's where I'll stop for now. Next time I'll tell you what happened, when he spoke my name in front of them for the first time in 5 years, and how one quiet sentence turned the entire table upside down. Make sure you're following, so you don't miss the moment they finally realized whose name was behind every plate they'd been critiquing. The appetizers had just been cleared. My father was halfway through a comment about portion sizes when I saw Marcus coming toward the table. He was steady as always, leather folder in hand, shirt pressed, sleeves rolled clean, just to the wrist. When he stopped beside us, he didn't look at anyone but me. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Is there a Miss Hannah Whitmore at this table?" My father frowned. Why Marcus turned without answering the question. "Welcome back, Miss Hannah," he said. "Your usual table is ready in the side dining room. Would you like me to bring the investor's wine list now or after your walkthrough?" It was quiet. Then, no clinking of glasses, no small laughs, just stillness. Rachel blinked once. My mother's hand froze around the stem of her glass. My father choked on a sip of wine. I'm sorry," he said, looking from Marcus to me. "What?" Marcus stayed polite. "Miss Whitmore prefers to dine privately when she visits the flagship. We held the back room for her. Shall I move the party?" There I set my water down. "No, thank you," I said. "This table is fine." No one moved. Rachel leaned forward, squinting. "You work here?" I shook my head. "Not exactly." My mother cleared her throat. "You know, the staff I trained, most of them." My father leaned in. "You're saying what?" "What are you saying, Hannah?" I folded my hands. "I own the restaurant." He blinked. What do you mean you own it?" I met his eyes. "I built the Honest Pig from the ground up. I designed the menu, the space, the concept you've been eating, dishes I created from ingredients raised on my farm." Rachel muttered something about farm-to-table trends and leaned back in her chair. "You're not serious," my father said. "You can't be." Marcus stepped in. "Then, sir," he said, "Miss Whitmore is the founder and executive chef of this location and of the entire brand. We currently have 7 restaurants across 4 cities. This one is the flagship." My mother whispered the brand like the word didn't fit in her mouth. I nodded the brand. I looked at all of them now, their postures slightly stiff eyes moving across the space like they were trying to redraw the room with this new information. "You lied to us," Rachel said quietly. "No," I said. "You assumed I had nothing. I let you believe that." My mother looked up quickly. "But why wouldn't you tell us?" I paused, because I needed to know who you were when you thought I had failed. Marcus leaned slightly forward. "Chef Miranda asked if you'd like to preview the heirloom rub for the spring menu before final testing." I stood. "I'll be back shortly," I said. "Enjoy the entree. It's the braised pork shoulder from the second rotation batch." I walked away before anyone answered. The kitchen was warm, the lights were low, and the line moved with practiced rhythm. Miranda handed me a spoonful of rub and didn't ask questions. We tested 3 variations and adjusted the paprika in the middle. One I signed off on the final blend and left the note on the prep board for Monday. 15 minutes later, I returned to the table. No one had touched the food. Steam still rose off the plates. The room around them continued on as normal, but the air at our table had changed. Rachel spoke first. "So it's all true?" I nodded. My father sat with his back, stiff hands folded. "You built this," he said, "from scratch." I said, "From the pigs you laughed at." My mother looked down at her napkin, then adjusted her necklace. "But the funding," she said, "the systems. How could you possibly—" I worked 3 jobs the first year. I said I lived in a trailer with a faulty heater. I cooked on a single burner and cleaned stalls between shifts. I pitched my idea to anyone who'd listen until someone did. Rachel leaned back. "You didn't have to cut us off," she said. "You could have called." I looked at her. "You cut me off the day I said I wanted to farm. You called it disgraceful. You told your friends I was having a crisis." My mother straightened. "We were worried," I nodded. "No, you were embarrassed." No one spoke for a while. The entree sat untouched. The weight of it lingered. Then I said, "What's funny is you waited 5 weeks for this table the whole time thinking you were just here for pork and wine." Rachel gave a small laugh, then caught herself. My father cleared his throat. "What matters now is what you've done." Hannah, this is remarkable, and we can acknowledge that. I don't need acknowledgement, I said. I waited a second. I need respect. They stilled again, not the kind that comes after a magazine article or a reservation confirmation, not the kind that waits for success before showing up. I need real respect from now on. Rachel looked at me. So what? Now, she asked, you walk away for good. I shook my head. No, but things change. If we're going to have a relationship, it'll be on my terms. No jokes about manure, no questions about how I can afford things. No more of that. My father nodded once. I think we can manage that. And no networking, I added. No business favors, no investor guests. This isn't about showing off your daughter's success at galas. I'm not a prize. You get to dust off now that you see me. My mother's eyes shimmered for a moment, but she didn't speak. I looked at each of them. I'm proud of this. Not just the food, but the way it came to be. I didn't bend. I didn't change to fit into what you thought success should look like. I came here tonight, not because I needed anything from you, but because for the first time, I didn't. Rachel nodded slowly. That's fair. Then I added, if you'd like, I can host the rehearsal dinner here as my gift. Her eyes widened. You'd do that? You're still my sister, I said. But make no mistake, this is my offer on my terms. And for the first time all evening, she smiled. Not a show smile, not a press for effect one, but something smaller, softer across the table. My father looked down. My mother turned her ring once, but said nothing. I'd like that, Rachel said. I'd like to know more about how you built this too. Come early, I said. I'll show you how to feed the pigs. She let out a laugh. I just might. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like we were performing for each other. It felt like a start. Next time I'll tell you how that night ended when the restaurant closed and the plates were cleared, and I sat with the notebook that carried every plan I'd ever written down. Make sure you're following the final chapter of This Night Was Quiet, but it said everything I needed it to. After the plates were cleared and my family left the restaurant that night, I didn't go straight home. I stayed behind like I always did, walked the back hallway past the pantry, and stood just outside the kitchen door, where the floor dipped slightly from years of boots and steam and movement. Miranda was still finishing the breakdown notes for the weekend prep. She glanced up when she saw me but didn't say anything right away. I pulled up a stool near the dry rack and helped label a batch of duck fat for Monday's shift. The place was quiet now, the kind of quiet that only comes after a full house of voices and footsteps has emptied out. It was the same rhythm I'd held on to since the beginning, even as we grew one location, then two, then five. I still started my days on the farm and ended most of them in a kitchen. When I was ready, I walked back toward my office. The hallway light flickered slightly near the staff lockers, same as always. On the desk was my leather notebook. I opened it and looked over the week's to-do list. Already half checked off across the margin were sketches of a new idea, a weekend field-to-table series for spring hosted right on the farm. I flipped back a few pages and reread the notes from the first time Gloria and I met. We'd sat at the farm's picnic table with a notebook between us and no real blueprint to follow. I'd said, I didn't want anything corporate. She'd said good, and then showed me how to scale without giving away the roots she brought. Discipline to what I had started out of instinct. Together, we'd opened locations in Portland, then Chicago, then Denver. We built teams that understood the mission from the inside out. No shortcuts, no frozen meat, no names on the wall. Unless they earned it with their hands. It wasn't flashy, but it worked, and for 5 years I kept my name out of everything. I never gave interviews that showed my face when food writers asked for photos. We sent dishes instead. We wanted people to care about what was on the plate, not whose story it came from. That privacy wasn't just a brand choice. It was a boundary, one I didn't break. Even when the offers came in thick television appearances, magazine spreads, national partnerships, I turned them down. They wanted something shinier, but I'd already built what mattered when we opened the Boston flagship. Inside that old train station, I walked the main floor alone the night before launch. The brick walls still carried the smell of metal and old timber. I ran my fingers along the bar's edge where the finish wasn't quite dry, and I said to myself, this will hold, and it did. We filled every seat that first weekend, And then everyone after. There were stories of couples driving 5 hours and sleeping in their cars to make their reservation. The next day they called it an experience, but to me it was dinner done right. We stayed small on purpose. No marketing firm, just word of mouth. Farm to fork and plates that spoke for themselves. My parents didn't know any of this. Not until that night at the table, and even then they hadn't seen the full scale. I hadn't wanted them to until now. I thought of Rachel's face when I offered to host her rehearsal dinner at the flagship. She had smiled for real, not out of politeness, and when she said she wanted to come see the farm. There wasn't judgment behind it, just something that might have been curiosity. The message came the next morning, a short text. "Thanks again, Hannah. Also, I meant it. If you're serious about showing me the pigs, I'll bring boots." I replied, "Sure. Tuesday works. Bring someone hungry." That afternoon, I drove back up to Vermont. The highway was half empty. Snowmelt dripping down from the shoulder ditches, and the sky holding low over the tree line. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, the pigs were already waiting at the gate. They always knew the sound of my truck. I checked the feed bins and walked the back pasture to make sure the fencing held through the windstorm that had come the night before. Then, I stepped into the old trailer where I'd first lived when the farm was just a patch of mud, and hope I kept it cleaned now, not for guests. Just to remember, a small desk still sat under the window where I used to sketch business ideas with gloves on because the heater barely worked. The old burner stove still had the pot where I'd burned the first batch of cider-braised pork belly. I didn't stay long in there, just long enough to flip open the photo album, tucked in the corner drawer. The first 6 pigs lined up in the snow. The garden bed. The year I finally grew collards without frostbite. The string lights I hung across the gate for the first dinner with investors. I closed the book and stepped outside. The wind carried the scent of early thaw and wet hay. The porch creaked behind me, and for a moment I let myself breathe there, with no noise but the barn doors rattling gently against their chains. It was quiet, but not lonely that night. I stayed in the cabin near the edge of the field, the one Gloria helped me build, when the farm began offering overnight tours in the fall. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the stars come out in pieces. And when I finally lay down to sleep, I didn't think about how they saw me now. I thought about how it all started, and how none of it would have happened if I hadn't said yes to a patch of land no one else wanted. Next time I'll tell you what happened when Rachel came to the farm with someone she wanted me to meet, and how that visit brought something forward I hadn't expected. Make sure you're following, so you don't miss what came next in the field where it all began. Rachel showed up on a Tuesday. Her car crunched slowly up the gravel and stopped near the barn, instead of the main cabin. She stepped out in boots that were too clean to be worn often, but solid enough to handle the field. A man followed her out of the passenger side. He was tall, quiet, carried himself like someone who didn't want to be in the way. They both looked around for a minute. Then she spotted me near the fence with a grain bucket and raised a hand. "Brought those boots," she said. I smiled once and nodded. "Good. You're gonna need them." We started with the basics. I showed them the new pasture rotation setup, the shelter upgrades, the feed mix we'd started sourcing last year from a co-op. One county over, they listened carefully. The man, his name was Ben, she said, asked about soil recovery and breed differences. I gave short answers at first, just facts, but they stuck with me as I moved through the routine, and over time the quiet between us started to feel more like comfort than distance. At one point, Ben knelt down near the fence and let one of the older sows nudge his boot with her snout. He didn't flinch. Rachel laughed. "She likes you," she said, "or she likes the smell of that leather." We made it back to the cabin by early afternoon. I had a pot of stew warming on the stove pork shoulder with carrots, onions, and a little cider vinegar. We ate it outside on the porch with slices of cornbread wrapped in tea towels. The air was brisk, but the sun was out, and the sound of the pigs rooting in the distance gave the whole place a kind of steady rhythm. Rachel took her time with her bowl. Ben cleared his plate and asked if I ever offered classes or private tours. I said, "Not yet, but we'd thought about it," he said. He'd bring his students if I did environmental science, small college 2 towns over. We sat there a while, long enough for the shadows to stretch. Rachel looked out toward the edge of the woods, then back at me. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't answer right away. I didn't want you to," I said eventually, not until it was ready. "Well," she said quietly, "it's more than ready." We didn't talk about the restaurant that day, not the wine list, not the manager, not the way my father had looked when the truth came out at the table. We just stayed in. The moment she left with a dozen eggs, a jar of pickled ramps, and a folded copy of the stew recipe in her coat pocket. A week later, I got another message from her. This one just said, "Can I bring Mom?" Next time I stared at it longer than I meant to, then typed back, "Yes, if she's coming to listen, not to talk." She replied, "Understood. She'll behave." My mother came the next Sunday. Rachel drove again. They arrived just before noon. This time my mother wore rain boots over wool socks and a scarf tied too tightly at the neck. She stepped out of the car, slowly scanning the place like she was trying to decide whether to call it charming or too much work. I met them near the pasture gate and handed her a clean pair of gloves. She didn't resist, just pulled them on. We didn't speak much the first hour. I walked them along the same loop, showed them the same things. The pigs were louder that morning, more restless from the cold. My mother flinched when one of them squealed behind her. But she didn't say anything sharp. When we reached the top edge of the property, I stopped by the cedar tree, the one I planted when the first piglet I ever raised didn't make it through that winter. Beneath it was a flat stone, just a mark, no name. This was the first lesson. I said. My mother stood next to me for a long time, then nodded. Once we walked back in silence inside the cabin. She took off her gloves, slowly held them in both hands. "Your hands," she said softly. I looked down. The calluses were still there. So were the scars along my knuckles. "They're strong," I said. "Yes," she replied, stronger than I knew. We didn't talk about anything hard, not that day, not the years in between. She just ate her stew and folded her napkin neatly when she was done. Rachel offered to help with the dishes. I let her. Before they left, my mother placed her hand on the edge of the cabin's doorway. Her eyes scanned the shelf by the window, the tools lined up on the pegboard, the boots near the door. Then she turned to me. "You built all of this?" she said. I nodded once. She didn't say she was proud, but her voice was different, less clipped, less formal, just real. They pulled away slowly, dust trailing behind the tires. I watched until the car disappeared over the hill, then turned and walked back toward the barn, that night after chores. I sat by the stove with the windows cracked open, just enough to let the cool air in. The smell of soil and wood smoke drifted in and settled. The notebook lay open on the table, a fresh page waiting. I didn't write anything right away, just sat there letting the quiet hold. Next time I'll tell you what happened when my father showed up unannounced 3 weeks later and how what he brought with him changed everything. We thought we'd settled, make sure you're following my father, showed up 3 weeks later. No warning, just the sound of tires on gravel and the sharp slam of a car door around midday. I was in the far pasture when I spotted him. Suit jacket over one arm standing by the fence, like it had something to prove. He didn't wave. Just waited. I finished. Setting out feed, gave the gate a solid latch, and made my way up the hill. He didn't say anything right away. Just looked around, taking it all in. Was in the area, he said eventually. I didn't answer. He cleared his throat. Thought maybe we could talk. I walked past him and pointed toward the main cabin inside, I said. He followed the door, stuck slightly at the top, same as always, and I had to lean on it with my shoulder to open it. Once inside, he stood near the window while I poured 2 glasses of water and set them on the table. "He didn't sit this place," he said, glancing around. "It's more than I imagined." I nodded once. He took a sip of water and pulled a folded envelope from his coat pocket. "I wanted to give you this," he said. I didn't reach for it. "What is it?" He looked down at it before handing it to me. "A proposal," he said, "a partnership offer." I opened it, slowly. Typed pages, letterhead. A breakdown of investment terms. His firm's name at the bottom, he went on. "There's a group of clients interested in sustainable food ventures, upscale rural hospitality. You're uniquely positioned. It's smart business." I set the papers down. "You want in on what I built?" He hesitated. "We believe in where it's going." I folded the papers carefully and slid them back across the table. "You didn't believe in where it started." He pressed his lips together. "I was wrong about that," he said. "I can admit it." I looked at him. Really looked the same man who told me I was throwing away a future, who hadn't sent a single card after I left, now standing in a room he wouldn't have stepped foot in. 5 years ago. I don't need funding, I said. It's not just funding, he replied quickly. We can scale this, Hannah. Bigger footprint. National attention. I already turned that down, I said, 3 times. He shifted his stance. This could take you further than what I asked. He stopped talking. The room went quiet again. The clock ticked behind him. I leaned back slightly. You came out here thinking you could offer me something, I said, but what I needed wasn't a check. He looked out the window for a moment. I didn't handle things well, he said. Back then, I didn't understand your choices. I didn't respond. He turned back to me. But I do now, and I'm trying to make it right. I reached for the envelope again, held it gently, then placed it on the small side table beside the window. If you want to make things right, I said, you can start by coming for dinner like anyone else. He nodded slowly. No talk of contracts. I added, no investor pitches, no business language. He gave the faintest smile. Just a meal, just a meal. He sat down. Finally, the chair creaked. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat with the sound of wind at the windows and the distant clatter of pigs shifting through the straw. When he left an hour later, he took the proposal with him. But before he reached the truck, he turned and said, I'd like to come back next Sunday if you're open. I nodded once. Bring gloves, I said. The next week, he returned wearing jeans and older boots than I expected. He didn't say much during chores. Just followed my lead and did what was asked by late afternoon. We sat on the porch with bowls of stew and a quiet between us that no longer felt cold. He reached into his coat pocket, not for a contract this time, but for an old photo. Me at 12 years old standing beside a piglet with a crooked ear. Your mother kept it, he said. I figured. He held it a moment longer, then set it on the table between us. I see it now, he said. I didn't need to ask what he meant. We sat a little longer until the sun dipped low and the barn lights flickered on before he left. He asked if he could bring Mom next time. I nodded, then added, if she's coming to eat, not to explain. He didn't argue, just said, understood. Next time I'll tell you what happened when they both came back and how one unexpected question around that porch table became the beginning of something I hadn't planned for. Make sure you're following the story's not quite done. There's still one more piece to come full circle. They came back the next Sunday, both of them. My father wore the same worn boots from the week before, and my mother carried a small tin of cookies wrapped in wax paper, her version of an offering. We walked the pasture together before lunch. She asked a few quiet questions about the fencing. The breed lines, the spring litters coming in, I answered simply. She didn't correct my answers or interrupt, just listened back in the cabin. The table was set with cornbread and stew and a pot of herbal tea from the garden. We ate slowly in no rush. About halfway through the meal, my mother reached across the table and placed her hand near mine. Not touching, just close enough to feel you built something lasting here, she said. I didn't look up right away, just nodded. My father added, we got it wrong, Hannah. We didn't see it before, but we see it now. I took a breath, let it out slowly. This wasn't built to prove anything. I said not anymore. My mother nodded once. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A recipe, my grandmother's sweet rolls in her handwriting. My mother slid it across the table. She would have liked it here, she said. She always said good things take time and that soil remembers kindness. I unfolded the paper, looked at the soft curls of my grandmother's letters, then tucked it gently into my notebook. We cleared the table together after that. No one rushed to leave. They stayed until the sky shifted pink and the field quieted for the night before they left. Rachel texted, heard they made it through the afternoon without ruining the stew. Proud of you. Rehearsal dinner is going to be something special. I smiled and typed back, bring boots, bring Ben, and leave room for the ham. Later that night, after the last dish had been dried and the lights were dimmed low, I stepped out onto the back porch with my notebook. The stars weren't as bright here as they used to be back in Vermont, but they were still enough. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, I used to think justice looked like being proven right, but maybe it's something quieter. Maybe it's peace in your own bones, even when no one claps for you. Maybe it's building a life that fits your hands, and maybe sometimes It's sitting at the table with the same people who once walked away because you finally know you can walk away too, but you chose to stay. I closed the notebook and watched the steam rise from my tea, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no weight in the room, just stillness earned. If this story made you think of your own journey, I'd love for you to share it in the comments, and if you've ever had to build something from the ground up, something they once said wouldn't last, I hope you know, now you never needed their permission to begin. Take care, and thank you for listening all the way through.